Last week we covered tama', which was covetous desire, and then what he says in there, rahimahullah, Sheikh Muhammad Mawlud bin Ahmed Farid Yaqubi al-Musawi, what he says is وَسُمُّهَا السَّاعِي تَطْوِيلَ الْأَمَلِ كَوْطِينُكَ النَّفْسَ عَلَى بُعْدَ الْأَجَلِ. He says that the Arabs have they call it summu sa'a, which is a poison that acts immediately, quick acting, immediate acting poison. The immediate acting poison of this love of dunya and tama' and all the diseases of the heart is tatwil al-amal. And then he gives us a definition of it, which is accustoming or assuring yourself that death is a long way off. And this is something, obviously, on the one hand, it's a necessary human condition. And there's an amazing wisdom in tatwil al-amal. And one of the wisdoms that the ulama have mentioned about tatwil al-amal is that if people did not have extended hope, they wouldn't bother planting trees. And if you thought you were going to die any minute, you're not really going to be worrying about farming or having children, and so what would happen is there'd be no infrastructure for the next generation. Every generation would have to come and deal with the immediate circumstances. But instead, because human beings do have hopes that they're going to live, they build things, they farm, right? They create infrastructure, and that infrastructure is inherited by the next generation. And the famous story that in one of the Persian stories is about the Persian Shah who passed by an old man planting an olive tree, and the king said, وَهَلْ تَنْفَعُكَ هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةِ وَسَتَمُوتُ قَبْلَ أَن تُدْرِكَهَا. Is this tree going to be of any benefit for you? Because you'll die surely before it comes to fruition, because a good olive tree takes several decades before it really is producing good olives. And so the sheikh said, and it became a proverb amongst the Arabs, زَرَعُوا قَبْلَنَا فَأَكَلْنَا فَنَحْنُ نَزْرَعُ حَتَّى يَأْكُلُوا. They planted before us, and we ate from what they planted. And so we plant so that those coming after us will eat. So the king gave him a reward, and then he said, already the tree benefited me. And so he gave him more. So the idea of this tatwil al-amal is that it's a necessary, it's a rahmah from Allah, that Allah has put this in. Because people wouldn't go to school, people wouldn't do anything. Now, one of the things about modern society is because of the apocalyptic nature of the age we're living in, people are beginning to lose hope about the future. A lot of young people are becoming very nihilistic, dressing in black, right, at these schools and things like this. There's a morbid perspective on the world. And the fast food culture, which is the idea of, get it now, don't wait. And the credit culture is a culture that really is causing people to lose this sense that there is a future. And in fact, it's only recently, this is the first generation of Americans that actually see that their future will be worse than their parents. Prior to that, Americans were noted for their cheery optimism about the future. And they're losing that. Right? And so it's actually a bad sign when people do lose hope. On the other hand, what he's saying is that it's also a deadly poison. If you have too much hope, it becomes a false hope, an amal, طول al-amal. And the result of it is that it generates hard-heartedness and indolence. So he says, يُرْهِثُ قَسْوَةَ الْقُلُوبِ وَالْكَسَلِ. What that means is, by طول al-amal, the heart becomes hard because it doesn't reflect on akhirah, it doesn't reflect on its own mortality, on its own dependence. And so it gets a hard heart. Now, Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad radiallahu anhu said, and he's one of the great early scholars and zuhad, the people of asceticism or of doing without. He said, خَمْسٌ مِنْ عَلَامَةِ الشَّقَاء. There's 5 things that are sign of shaqa, which is wretchedness. The world is divided into 2 types of people. Sa'id and Shaqi. There's only 2 types. That's it. No third. Sa'id and Shaqi. Sa'id is felicitous. And Shaqi is wretched. And the idea is obviously, now, if you look at Aristotle, who's kind of foundational to Western civilization, Aristotle wrote a book called The Ethics. And in this book, he basically says the goal in life is leisure and happiness. And this is reflected in the Declaration of Independence. Because the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, he says in there that people have these inalienable rights from God, given to them. And he says among which are life, haya, haqqul haya, liberty, hurriya. These are Sharia rights as well. But then he says, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? In his original wording, he actually said the right to be free of debt when you come into the world. Right? Because what happens now is that, like, because of national debt, children are born in debt. I think it's about $50,000 in debt. Like, every child that's born is automatically in debt based on their previous generation's overspending. So, that was the original phrase, but then he changed it to the pursuit of happiness. Now, what is happiness to a middle-aged, white landowner in 1776? Having more land. So their idea of happiness really was the pursuit of stuff, of goods. And this is part and parcel of the modern American dream. Happiness is seen as pursuing stuff. What Islam did is it radically altered human beings' understanding of what happiness is. Happiness is not necessarily a quote-unquote good life. According to the Muslims, happiness is sa'ada in the next world. If you're sa'id in the next world, it doesn't matter how you lived your life in this world. And the previous class, when we were looking at the seerah, the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, when he said, if you're not angry with me, then I don't care what you do with me. In other words, if my life is miserable in this world, but I haven't incurred your wrath, I'm happy with that. Because he knows that the akhirah, خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى, the last, the end world, the afterlife, is better than the first life. So, anyway, the opposite concept of shaqawa is sa'ada, felicitousness, is shaqawa. Shaqawa is the idea of, in the next world, the person doesn't have akhirah. They're shaqi. That's what it means. So Fudayl ibn Iyad said that there were 5 signs of shaqawa. The first one was qaswat al-qalb, a hard heart. That's a sign a person's shaqi. And the Prophet ﷺ said to a man who saw him kiss a baby, he said, أَتُقَبِّلُ أَوْلَادَكَ? He said, نَعَمْ أُقَبِّلُ أَوْلَادِي. I kiss my children. He said, عندي 10 أولاد ما قبلت واحدا منهم. I have 10 children, I never kissed one from them. And that's the ghilva, it's a pride in being a tough Arab. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لا أملك شيئا في ديني لمن نزع الله من قلبه الرحمة. I don't have anything in my deen for a man who Allah has removed rahmah from his heart. So hard-hearted it means that you don't have a portion of the deen. Right? إِرْحَمُوا مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يَرْحَمْكُمْ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ. Have mercy on those in the earth, and He in the heavens will have mercy on you. So, قَسْوَةُ الْقَلْبِ, جُمُودَ الْعَيْنِ. the eye that doesn't weep. And the ulama say, if you want to know whether your heart is hard, then look at your eye. Because if the eye is dry, it's an indication of a hard heart. Right? So the person who has riqqa in the heart has a wet eye, and the person who doesn't has a hard heart. And the next is qillatul haya, lacking modesty. People that don't have shame. إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ مِنْ كَلَامِ النُّبُوَّةِ الْأُولَى, from the words of first prophecy. If you have no shame, do whatever you want. If you don't have shame, do what you want. So qillatul haya is a sign of shaqawa. الرغبة في الدنيا, desiring dunya, is a sign of shaqawa. Because they say that no one increases in his akhirah except that it harms his dunya. And no one increases in his dunya except that it harms his akhirah. By the nature, because they're two opposites. So increase in one is decrease in the other. Now this does not mean wealthy people automatically you assume that, there's a famous story, it's a story. It's like a teaching story. I mean, it doesn't, there's a famous story, it's a Moroccan story, right? About, there was a Zahid who heard about this Sheikh who had, that he was a big wali of Allah. And so he wanted to go see him. And he came down from the mountain, he was riding his lion. And he gets there, and the Sheikh lives in a big palace. And he said, this is so-and-so's house? And he's shocked because he lives up in a cave. And then the Sheikh comes out, and he says, where can I put my lion? He said, put him in my barn with my cow. He said, no, he'll eat the cow. He said, no, just put him in the barn with the cow. So he puts him in the barn with the cow. Then they have this big dinner, and the Sheikh eats a few bites, and he says, Astaghfirullah. This is so luxurious. He said, I live on water and dates. And then that night, the Sheikh goes to sleep. The Zahid stays up all night praying, and he hears the Sheikh snoring next door. He's completely shocked about it. He decides the next morning after Fajr, he's just leaving. So he goes to get his lion. He goes in, and the cow ate the lion. So he says to the man, where's my lion? He said, your lion's just like you. It's all outward. You see. And he said, and you thought my cow was a harmless cow, but he was a lion inside. Anyway, the point of that story is, you have to be very careful because outward appearances can fool people, right? And Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says an amazing thing. Well, we'll get to that when we get to having a bad opinion of people. So anyway, and the last one is طول الأمل. So those 5 things are a sign of hardness of the heart. And what this science is about is bringing life to the heart. And one of the interesting things in Nur al-Yaqeen, which is the seerah by an Egyptian scholar, one of the things that he mentioned in there was how the Sahaba lost, many of them lost all of their dunya. And he says in there, but he said their concern was not, and he talked about the first masjid built at Quba, and said this was a simple masjid. There was, in fact, he said a Muslim now would not recognize it as a masjid. And he said because now we've become obsessed with ornamenting our outward appearance. And he said and our inwards are bereft. He said the Sahaba were the opposite. They had no concern for the beautification of the outward. They were only concerned with the purification of their hearts. And there's a big difference, right, on that emphasis. And so what he's saying is that طول الأمل will generate hard-heartedness and indolence regarding obligations, which leads to inroads into the prohibited. What that means is kasal is this indolence. It's a lack of energy to do things. Now, interestingly enough, there will be people who have incredible energy when it comes to dunya things. When it comes to akhirah, they have no energy at all. In fact, people say, I really can't pray. I work so hard. And I get home and I'm really tired and I just fall asleep and I'd like to pray but I don't have time. There are people really that literally say that, quite literally. That's a sign that their heart's dead. Because they have time for things in dunya and they don't have time for akhirah, which means they really don't believe in akhirah. And one of the things Hasan al-Basri said, I saw 70 men of Badr. He said, if you saw them, you would say madmen. He's talking to the tabi'een. You would say majaneen. He said, if they saw the best of you, they would say, these people have no character. And if they saw the worst of you, they'd say, these people don't believe in the Day of Judgment. So, the belief in akhirah will manifest in the behavior and in the concerns of a human being. The stronger their belief in akhirah, the more they're concerned about their akhirah and how to protect it. Now, if you look on the footnote, there is loss of energy for even obedient actions, and one will begin to convince himself that he is unable to do what he's obliged to do due to his state, and thus it creates inroads into the prohibited. In other words, they'll say, I just can't do it, I'm unable, and that leads to the haram. So, Qul al-amal is dangerous. Now, there's a tradition, it's not a hadith, but it's often quoted as a hadith, and the tradition says that اعمل لدنياك كأنك تعيش أبدا وعمل لأخراك كأنك تموت غدا. Act for your dunya as if you'll live forever, and act for your akhirah as if you're going to die tomorrow. Now, Sheikh Uthman Bashir, rahimahullah, a dear friend of mine who lived in Medina most of his life, he was from Eritrea. He told me once, he said, people don't understand that saying. And he said it's always used as a justification for working really hard for dunya. So the dunyawi people love that hadith because they always say, Ya akhi, i'mal li dunyaka ka'annaka ta'ishu abada. He said, if you look at it in the context of work for your dunya as if you'll live forever, but work for your akhirah as if you're going to die tomorrow. He said, if you then look at your situation bifocally, one, your dunya matters, you have forever to take care of them, but your akhirah, you're going to die tomorrow. He said, you're going to start preparing for your akhirah and say, I have plenty of time to take care of my dunya. So it's the opposite kind of understanding that most people have, and that's really the way. Now the other thing is, لَا تَنْسَى نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. In the Quran, Qarun, don't forget your portion of the dunya. There's two ways that's interpreted. One is, don't forget what Allah has given you in order that you can expend it for akhirah. And the other is, the dunya is there and Allah gave it to you, so don't forget that there is dunya, but the important thing is akhirah. And these are they're both acceptable positions. So we're not anti-worldly, like say for instance traditional Christianity was. We're not against the world. The world is a place Allah made it for us to enjoy as well. But not to enjoy to the point where we forget what we're really here for and that it's a bridge. And then he says, and then the verse in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is an example of it, he said, أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَمَا نَزَلَ مِنَ الْحَقِّ وَلَا يَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَطَالَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْأَمَدُ فَقَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. A long time passed and their hearts became hard. So the idea is that if you're not really thinking about akhirah, the longer you are on the earth, the harder the heart gets. Now if you look at children, one of the really fascinating things about children, they can cry like that, very easily. And part of it is that their hearts are very supple, and they go into several states in one day. They can go from extreme joy to extreme sadness in one day. Right? And it's very interesting why their hearts are like that. They're very pure. And so everything affects them in very profound ways. And as a person gets older, it becomes more and more difficult for them. And this is why, one of the things why the Prophet ﷺ loved women, one of the things that he loved from the world, or was made to love, was women. And the ulama say, لِرَقَّةِ قُلُوبِهِنَّ, because their hearts are more brittle than men's. Right? Their hearts are more brittle than men. In other words, women have more compassion, their hearts are more open, things like that. For men, it's very easy for that heart to become hard. And so the danger of طول الأمل is that it makes the hard heart. And then he says, لكنه في حق من غدا أب أو كان في تصنيفه علم لم يعب. Regarding the one who's engaged in preparing for tomorrow or writing works of knowledge, I mean, obviously he puts that in there. He's a scholar, and that's one of the highest things that you can do is sadaqa jariyah, or ilm yuntafa' bihi nas, like ongoing charity, or knowledge that people will benefit. So he's saying, if you're engaged in benefiting people with knowledge, like writing books, then it's not a blameworthy thing to want to live a long life. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tatamannaw al-maut." Don't desire to die, because he said either if you did wrong in the past, you want life to make tawbah and rectify what you did wrong. Or if you did good, you want more time to do more good. So either way, even if your life has been bad in the past, each day is a new day and a new opportunity to make tawbah to Allah and to change your ways. So you should always desire long life if you're engaged in good things. If you're not, then what he's saying is it's a disaster. So for people who are not wasting their time and recognize the urgency of the human condition and their own impending mortality, and sets out doing useful deeds such as spreading knowledge or anything else that's useful. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that what benefits, right? يَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. It continues and it goes on in the earth. And one of Mukhtar wal-Buna got very sick at one point, and somebody said, are you afraid you're going to die from this sickness? He said, La la la. He said, I have an ayah in the Quran that tells me I'm not going to die yet. And he said, what? And he said, Allah says what benefits people stays for a long time. And he was a great scholar who was very beneficial to people. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, hard-hearted. People that have a hard heart, people whose eye, jumud al-ayn, their eye doesn't really weep. Qillat al-haya, they don't have shame, right? There's no modesty. And then desirance of dunya, loving dunya, raghba fi dunya, wa tul al-amal, and extended hope, false hope. And then there's also a very beautiful hadith, which says, الأمل رحمة من الله ولولاه لما غرس غارس ولا وضعت ولدا. The extended hope is a mercy from Allah. For had it not been for hope, you wouldn't see a farmer planting seeds nor a woman giving birth to a child. So it's a rahmah from Allah. That's the important thing to understand. And it is part of our nature. We really do believe that we're going to go on, right? And if we didn't believe that, I mean, we couldn't do anything. We couldn't function in the world. You'd just be in a paralyzed state. So the idea is not to go into that state of paralysis, but the idea here is to reflect on death. You know, تفكروا أخي في الموت فإنه نازل ولا تطيل الأمل فيقصرك القلب. It's right there in Qasida. He says, reflect on death, because it is coming. Right? It is coming. And then he says, and don't extend your hopes, فَيَقْصُرَكَ الْقَلْبِ, because your heart will become hard. Right? And then the other thing about this, and I mentioned this before, but one of the things that is a good exercise to do is to meditate on death and death states. And that's, he says, فَكِّرْ فِي أَحْوَالِ الْقِيَامَةِ دَائِمًا كَبَعْثٍ وَنَشْرًا وَالْمَوَازِينُ تُنْصَبُ. وَكَالصِّرَاطَ الَّذِي تَتُولُ عَقَبَتُهُ تَطُولُ عَلَى الْعَاصِي وَمَشْيُ يَصْعُبُ. That to reflect on death and to reflect on the stations of death itself, like the sirat. To reflect on the sirat, that we have to cross the sirat, that's something. And it's interesting, one of the things that athletes are trained to do in this country is visualization. In other words, if they have a race to do, or fighting, boxers will do that. What boxers will do is they'll actually go through the fight in their, like a visualization, as a psychological preparation. And so really, this is the same idea, is that what you're doing is you're preparing yourself psychologically for a journey that you're going to go on. And this is, like Murabb al-Hajj has a qasida about death, and in it he says, فَسَتُسَافِرُ غَدًا أَيَّ السَّفَرِ. You're going to travel tomorrow, and what a journey. Meaning death. What a journey. I mean, this is a real thing. That the moment that you die, there's a severance, and you're still conscious. Only you're in hyper-conscious state. In fact, you're so conscious that this state becomes like a dream. And that's why people, when they die, they actually feel like they're waking up. Right? And nasu niyam. People are asleep, Sayyidina Ali said, and when they die, he said, suddenly they intabahu. They come to their, attention. Right? So, the idea of reflecting on death, one of the exercises many of the Salaf did was actually lying down and imagining being lowered into the grave. And this is not a morbid exercise. It's really it's a training, and it's very effective. It really is. It's an effective thing to do. Some of the ulama, they said if somebody has a lot of shahwa, that's a good way to control the shahwa, like young people that have shahwa for appetites, that if they do that reflection and things like that it'll give some sobriety to their state. Now, another thing that's really important that Imam al-Qarafi radiallahu anhu mentions is the difference between raja, right, and tul al-amal. Raja is similar to hope. And then amal is different. So there are many verses in the Quran like وَلَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ إِسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهِ. The one who yarju Allah, they have raja of Allah. So there's a hope for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. And for the last day. And there's a famous hadith in which Aisha radiallahu anhu said, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ أَحَبَّ لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ أَحَبَّ اللَّهُ لِقَاءَهُ. The one who Allah loves to meet, who loves to meet Allah, Allah loves to meet him. And Aisha said, Ya Rasulullah, what about disliking death, right? And he said, كُلُّكُمْ تَكْرَهُونَ الْمَوْتِ, right? That's a natural thing not to like death itself. But to not want to meet your Lord, that's something the mu'min wants, is looking forward to that. Now there's something really interesting also. The Muslim emphasized this relationship between khawf and raja. وَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ عَلَيْهِ خَوْفٍ مَعَ الرَّجَى. You have to have the two sandals of fear and hope. So you walk with fear and hope. Right? If you're overwhelmed by fear, it puts you into a psychological state of terror and you get what's called ya'as. The psychological result of ya'as is despair. So too much excessive fear leads to despair of the mercy of Allah. You actually think, I'll never be saved from Allah. And this is a very common religious illness. Right? Less so now, right? Because people are not as religious as they used to. But this was a very common religious illness, and it still is for certain people. There are Christians that go into this state very easily. that are in a type of evangelical fire and brimstone Christianity that focuses a lot on hellfire, damnation. The Pilgrims actually believed that there were only 144,000 saved. They were called the elect. Now, obviously, there were more than 144,000 pilgrims, so that kind of, your odds in that religion were not very high, right? And I think the Jehovah's Witnesses actually believe that also. Yeah, because it's taken from Revelations, right? This 144,000 elect. So that's big fear. Too much fear. Too much hope, excessive hope, is another disease that leads to this lack of, it leads to a type of complacency. Well, I don't have any problem. And so one stops doing actions. And there's an interesting article about Bill Clinton and baptism. And a lot of people don't know this about baptism, but the Baptist religion has this concept that you can really do anything that you want, and you're saved as a Baptist because you believe in Jesus as your Savior, and they have very little fear of the fire. They don't really emphasize that. They really emphasize salvation through Christ, and everybody's wretched. You're all sinners, which is why somebody like Jimmy Swaggart can, all that can happen to him, and he can go back and actually preach, and everybody in the churches, they're all still sitting there listening to him, right? I mean, if the same thing happened to a imam, right? La qaddar Allah. I mean, that's it. Nobody's going to have any respect for that person, right? Because the Muslims have a much higher expectation of the people that they expect to be, examples for their community, which is one of the reasons why a bastard child, it's makruh for them to lead the prayer. Not because they did anything wrong, but simply because it's not a good qudwa or example for the community to have as an imam somebody whose parents were not upright as well. Right? Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for a person, say a bastard child, to become holy?
Absolutely, yeah. No, there's no itham on a bastard child. There's none. There's no itham on them, and it's between them and their Lord. What their mother and father did, that's their business. لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. No soul bears the wrong actions of another soul. Right. So, and there were people in the Arabian Peninsula, many people at that time who were not, they didn't have legitimate fathers. I mean, the Arabs fornicated it was quite common. So there were illegitimate children at that time that did become Muslim, right? And those people were considered the best people. So, I mean, their worst people are better than our best people. Really. I mean, the least of the Sahaba, in terms of their actions, the least of them are better than the best of us. Simple as that. And the ulama say simply by the ru'ya, they were given the ru'ya. I mean, that's enough of a bounty from Allah. They were given the vision of the Prophet in waking state and believed in him. So, now, right, the amal is, what amal is a desire to live a long life, right? Long life. To have wealth, right? To have those things in life that we generally attribute to this state of happiness. That is what amal is. It's a hope for that. It's a raja. And then there's something else which is called umniya. And this is what's blameworthy in Islam. And umniya is a hope. What the difference between raja and umniya is that raja, always the sabab is taken. In other words, the means to obtain the thing that you're doing is taken. Whereas with an umniya, it's bila sabab. the means is not taken. So for instance, if you want to get healthy, so what you do is you start watching your diet, you start exercising, that's called the raja, huwa yarju as-sihha. But somebody who, he says, I really want to get healthy. He doesn't change that. As he's eating his, all his junk food and watching television or something like that, and he said, I really want to get healthy. And he's doing nothing to change his state. That's called umniya. And that's what Allah says the Jews and the Christians have about akhirah. They have amani. They're not doing anything to get the akhirah. Right? They're corrupting in the earth. They're not, and that's why the Muslims, they have to watch out because, like my friend Abdul Hakim Murad told this story about the Pakistani man who was walked by these three racists in London, and one of them said, I'm moving to Wales because there's only 1%, 3% Muslims there. And the other one said, no, I'm going to Scotland because they only have 2%. And the third one said, I'm going to Ireland because they only have 1%. And this Muslim said, why don't you go to hell? They don't have any Muslims there. And so, what Abdul Hakim said about that, Sidi Abdul Hakim, hafidhahullah, what he said about that was that the assumption, of course, is that Muslims don't go to hell. Unfortunately, there's going to be a big shock on the Yawm al-Qiyamah, right? Because if you have amani, and all you have for your Islam is that the shahadatain, right? They call the shahadatain. Shahadat al-wilada or shahadat al-wafat. Your testimony when you were born that you were a Muslim, they wrote it on your birth certificate, and when you died, right? They wrote it on your death certificate. If that's all you have, and I was in Santa Clara, Farif was with me once. These people came and their grandfather had died, and they came to the masjid to bury him. None of them were practicing Muslims. And their grandfather wasn't a practicing Muslim, but he died. And they realized, hey, we're Muslims, and how do we bury our grandfather? Well, let's take him to the mosque. And so they brought him there, and we washed the body and did these things. But it's very sad that that's the extent of people's experience of Islam when they get married and when they die. Right? They have to have the imam to marry them, or they have to have somebody who knows how to wash the body and pray over them. So that's umniya. So raja, hoping for Allah, is when you're doing those things that you need to do in order to be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the other thing that the ulama say is that you should have khawf should be overriding until when you get to your deathbed. At that point, you should forget all about fear and just have absolute hope in Allah. You should have no fear on your deathbed. You should be completely immersed in a sense of Allah's rahmah and that He will forgive me and He will accept me, and have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.